And can Europe sleep better after the visit from the triumvirate of Tillerson, Pence and Mattis?
Well, they were the speeches that the Europeans wanted to hear, but as I'm sure you know, they are completely inconsistent with the things that the actual president of the United States has been saying about foreign policy over the course of the past 30 days. I do think that some were a little bit comforted, but most, I think, understand that they are still in wait-and-see mode, and they don't like that one bit. They don't. I mean, they'd love it if Tillerson and Mattis and Pence were the people actually running the government and running foreign policy. But there's no reason for them to believe thus far that that's indeed the case.
Yeah, what was your big takeaway, Ian? You were there at the Munich Security Conference over the weekend. What for you was the big takeaway?
Well, that was one, of course, in the sense that just like when you were at Davos, you saw Xi Jinping and he gave a speech that sounded like it could have been given by an American president. And then you open your eyes and you realize, wait a second, that's the Chinese, and they're still a state capitalist authoritarian regime, so it's a little inconsistent. Same thing with Pence. He gave a speech that, I was at the Munich Security Conference last year as well. It was very similar to what I heard from Kerry the previous year. You could have heard from Biden, could have heard it from Obama. And then you open your eyes, you realize, well, wait a second, that's not what we're hearing from Washington. So there's that big disconnect, but certainly good that the Americans saw fit to actually send a high-level delegation. Lots of members of Congress were there. They were loud, and they were trying to reassure the Europeans that NATO still matters. The other point is that the Russians, you could see the foreign policy literally changing over the course of the meeting, as lots of people advising Putin, who had promised them that when Trump comes in, life is going to get better, suddenly not so sure that's the case, and they're scared. The last thing you want to be is one of Putin's advisors having poorly advised Putin that if you don't go ahead on sanctions against Obama, that everything's going to be fine when Trump comes in. So, I definitely saw very skittish Russian delegation, the Iranians right there with them, and then finally the Chinese much more committed to the existing world order, while the Russians wanting to tear it down, the Europeans feeling stuck in the middle. But at least for the first time since 2008, the Europeans, the primary problem and concern for the Europeans wasn't actually in Europe. It was another country, it was back in Washington.
Ian, we're a month into the Trump presidency. It's President's Day. I want you to grade Trump. I want you to grade him on the Bremmer success scale.
Incomplete, not applicable, sort of no comment. It's very clear that the U.S. markets, which is what, here at Bloomberg you're focusing on 24/7, continued to respond very well to a Republican House and Senate that Trump made possible, and that he is clearly pushing on things like a focus on jobs. He's clearly focusing on infrastructure. He's talking about getting taxes for corporations down. Markets still like all of that. But on every other issue, if you're talking about foreign policy in the rest of the world, American allies all over the world are not happy. Look at the Australian call, the prime minister with Trump. Is that a country we want to be picking on? Look at Sweden. You want to pick on the Swedes? Are we just randomly picking a country out of a hat that Trump wants to beat up on every week? You might as well do it that way, because it's clearly, there's no plan behind it. The fact is that other nations around the world are unnerved by the fact that you have an American president that is not only unpredictable, but that they don't think they can actually rely on. And there are certainly exceptions. You see that from Bibi Netanyahu in Israel because of the personal friendship that he has with the president. You see it from the Mexicans because no matter how upset they are, they have no choice but the United States. But, you go to Europe, and certainly sitting here in Berlin right now, the Germans are just completely unnerved by this new Trump administration. I don't know how you can grade them when one of America's top allies feels that way.